Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitinwriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
My guest is Marcus Ryle. He is an inventor, innovator, product designer, co-founder of Line 6, and to use a well-worn phrase, a music industry veteran.
I certainly have the years for it. So
yes, I understand. Well, welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
I'd like to start with just a little bit of your own personal background, both musical and technical. And I'm sure that they intertwine, especially because you are known as a keyboardist and synthesist in your musical background. And so I'm guessing that the two of them sort of evolved simultaneously, the technical and the musical. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, I was really very fortunate because my mom's family historically was very musical. My dad's was very technical. So I'm kind of a natural mix, and I was exposed to a lot at a real early age, both musically and technically. You know, I was making little electronics projects and stuff from an early age, and taking classical piano and so on. And then probably around age 9 or 10, my dad brought home a record with synthesizers in it, and for most people at that point it was switched on Bach. In my case, it was Dick Hyman's Moog.
Oh, I love it.
It's called Moog. You know
Yes.
that record?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of changed my life. I just remember just hearing non-organic instruments for the first time as a kid. I can remember that vividly. I played that record to death, and just somehow kind of from that moment knew just music and technology was my thing. So
But Dick Hyman was an unsung hero in certain ways. When well-known musicians started using synthesizers, it was a completely different approach. Whereas Hyman was kind of nerdy and a little bit out there, and a little bit kind of
he was a jazz guy, and just experimenting. But it just happened to be the first record. I have a feeling for me, I would have probably had the reaction to any first synthesizer record. I quickly got others. Switched on Bach was amazing. Tomita's Snowflakes Are Dancing, just unbelievable synthesizer work. So yeah, just got into it, started saving my pennies until I think I was 12 or 13, and bought a Whiteface Arp Odyssey. That was my first synth, and
daring.
Yeah, started taking it apart and wanting to learn about it and stuff like that. And that's that personal interest, that hobby, just kind of naturally morphed into a career, and seems to be what I'm still doing.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Odyssey in particular, and also the era, there were a lot of things happening constantly. I mean, in terms of the development of synthesis, that was really the age of so many new technologies coming out day after day. And I'm thinking, especially as a musician, if you had piano lessons before that, all of a sudden you're faced with, first of all, a monophonic instrument.
Yeah.
And secondly, an instrument that is, even though it creates a lot of new sounds and everything, there are a lot of limitations there. And I think I've always felt that limitations tend to make you work harder to do different things and experiment more.
Oh yeah, I mean limitations are an important ingredient, I think, for creativity. But also for me, I think the focus was very much on just all the new things it could do. Again, it was, if I wanted to play polyphonically, that's what a piano was for. Or it, shortly thereafter, a Hammond or a clavinet or Rhodes, any number of keyboards were polyphonic, but doing sounds that none of those could do. That was really what the synthesizer was all about for me.
So did it challenge you on a technical level though? I mean, that must have appealed to you as well.
Yeah, I think I was really lucky in that the concept of voltage control and the building blocks of analog synthesizers just came real naturally to me. So I was definitely challenged technically in trying to understand the circuits, how it actually worked, but to operate it, I was kind of a duck to water. It just, you know, operating any synthesizers just came really naturally. I mean, it was very logical. I think I'm a real logical person. I've been accused of being Spock-like on occasion. So that just really fit. You know, I mean, you just knew, well, if I put this voltage to this input, you know exactly what it should do. So it was a logical signal flow, logical construct for me.
Spoken like a keyboard player. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
So what was the parallel the parallel development there? I mean, I know you for at least a certain period of time were also a session musician, because I ran into you when I was working in studios. So how was
Yeah.
tell me about the development there of the technical stuff and the musical stuff.
Yeah, well, the musical stuff, I mean, you know, from an early age, I started playing in bands from age 12, and you know, just loved making music, playing music. You know, for a while had the delusion of, you know, I'll just be a rock star someday. I didn't have any
Didn't we all?
aspirations to be to be a product designer. Um, and I hadn't done. I had just turned. Maybe I was still 18 or just turned 19 when a set of circumstances happened that I met Tom Oberheim and he offered me a job. So that was really the first crossroads for me of, do I want to have a real job, essentially someplace I have to actually go to work, because up till then I hadn't done that.
We
But
were already playing sessions and
I
whatnot.
wasn't doing sessions yet. The sessions actually was a happy accident that in no small part was because I worked at Oberheim.
Interesting.
And so up until that point, I was mainly gigging. It was my wife and I were in a couple bands. We Not my girlfriend then, and wife shortly thereafter. You know, we were in a couple original bands, so we'd play the Troubadour or place like that, and then cover bands, playing lots of weddings, trying to make a living making music. So we'd play at, you know, hotel bars and casuals, weddings and stuff, and that was mainly what I was doing. And then recording, I was in I guess it'd be kind of a progressive rock style band that we thought we were gonna make it big, and we spent a lot of time recording tunes that no one has ever heard.
But you rehearsed them for hours and hours first to make sure all the parts were right. Yep.
Yeah. So that was kind of that era for me. It was just like lots of different bands, lots of just different music stuff going on, but I wasn't doing any session work at that time. So I started at Oberheim in 1980, and that was the best schooling I could get, and designing synthesizers and the other products Oberheim made from 80 to 85. And my session work actually started just because I obviously was meeting a lot of people through Oberheim. I mean, you've got to remember, people think of Oberheim, those classic Oberheims, as expensive today, but they were expensive back then. I mean, when you
more than a car.
yeah, it was like buying a car. I mean, in 1981, when we'd finished the first iteration of the Oberheim system, which was, you know, pre-MIDI, and a drum machine, a sequencer, and a synthesizer all connected together,
Right.
you know, multi-track sequencing, quantizing, looping. You could actually make music with this system in a way that you couldn't do before. So, but it cost almost $10,000 in 1981.
Yeah, you
So
could buy a
this was
car
not
for about that much in
yeah,
1981.
this was not for the faint of heart. You could buy a nice car for that back then. You know, so the people who bought these were pretty serious, And so I was meeting artists and songwriters, and actually a songwriting duo, Steve Kipner and Paul Bliss. Steve called me up. He had questions about the stuff, so I just wanted to help guys out anytime I could. And Steve and Paul wrote they'd already written a lot of great songs, but they'd written a new song for Olivia Newton-John that was kind of the first time where it was going to be like pretty much all the Oberheim system. And Steve asked if I'd come down to the studio to help out when they were going to cut the track. And I said I'd be happy to do it. And John Farrar was producing, and just had a great time helping make sounds, make things work, and so on. And what I was still quite young and naive, and kind of surprised when they said they wanted to pay me to do this, because I was happy to just help out, but they insisted. And then it's kind of a classic Hollywood story, because I wasn't trying to do sessions, but word just quickly got around town, and I was getting called by all kinds of producers and artists. And so I was kept pretty busy from the early 80s through 86 or 87 doing sessions, but always kept my day job. So I was, the main thing I was doing was making products.
And that's an interesting thing too, because a very typical path for a lot of people is that they start out as aspiring rock stars and eventually transition into working for manufacturers. And there's a lot of times, and I know it's true of myself and a number of other people I've talked to, there's sort of a reckoning of, your first impulse is to think, oh, I'm compromising by going to work for a manufacturer. And then, for me, what happened was the realization that, oh, no, I'm actually really giving input into making these tools. And I think you came from almost the other direction, in a sense. You were already making those tools, and you already had an appreciation for the value of that.
Yeah, I think, for some people, these sort of crossroads, and deciding what they think is compromising their art or not. For me, it was pretty simple. It's like, and lucky in that ideally you're able to really identify what you really like, what you're passionate about, but you also have to try as objectively as you can to recognize what are you really good at. And if you're lucky, those two align, right? So in my case, and being, doing a lot of gigging early on, and then being at a young age thrown into the session world, I think I was able to be pretty realistic that as a keyboard player, there's a million people who can play as well or better than me. There's lots of talent out there, and especially being in LA, if you go and do, I would do sessions for a David Foster or Michael Amardian, who are unbelievable keyboard players in their own right. They don't need me to play keys. I mean, they'd let me play sometimes, and I could do fine, but I realized that was, I knew quickly I really enjoyed doing it, but that was never going to be my career. But as a player, but I recognized what I was really good at, and what was of value to those folks was that I really understood the gear. I understood sound, I understood the physics of sound, and I could create whatever sound they were thinking up that they wanted to be as a part of this song, do something unique for what project they're working on. So my knowledge of the gear, it was just, I really just loved the gear, loved creating new sounds, and was always fascinated with and loved the inner workings and how to create the next generation of tools. So that was just, so again, I'm very lucky that I really enjoy, I certainly enjoy music, but music for me is it's a great recreation. I love it that, I'm lucky that I'm married to a musician, and we can just go, we have a little jam room, and we can just go and play music for fun. She plays every day, and I should, but or have friends over and just have a jam, or if someone still wants to have some synthesizer thing done, can help out with that. But that's fun. That never, I feel lucky that was never a career, because frankly, when I was doing sessions, I would see other session musicians where I really could sense the pressure they were under, that they were auditioning for their next gig with every session they did, right? How they performed and what they delivered. And I was extremely lucky in that I never felt that pressure. I was just having a good time and happy to help out. And ironically, that's probably a big part of why I kept getting called back, because I was just having a good time and helping out. I wasn't trying to figure out a way to get my next gig. So
funny, there was a musician that I in one of the sessions that I was seconding on years ago, and he made a comment one time. He said, "I'm always 2 weeks away from being unemployed." And you're right. That's an absolute pressure to live with, and it's it definitely changes the tenor of how you approach your work. But I do think that you having a musical ear and an understanding of music probably really played a big part as well.
Well, absolutely. I think the thing there is that I've worked with a lot of very, very talented technologists. Some of them, their real passion is they really just love the technology. They love the challenge of it. And sometimes the joy they get out of that, you can lose sight of why you're even doing it.
Yes.
And for me, the technology, I love it, but it's always just been a means for an end. I had no interest in making something that was a technological marvel that no one cared about. Right. I mean, I talk about, when I talk with students about developing products and thinking about what are the needs you're trying to fill. And there's lots of examples, sadly, of really, really amazing technology that just seem like people didn't stop to think, what problem are they actually solving? What is this for the customer? And an example I give often that's not from our industry at all, and one I don't actually know that much of the details of, so I'm happy to have someone correct me if I have it wrong. But from an outsider's view, when the Segway was first announced, it was touted as the most revolutionary technology. It was going to change, literally, they said it would change transportation.
Right. Yes.
And I first saw it, and on the one hand, marveled at the technology, right? Wow, 2 wheels and it just balances and you just lean. But for me, immediately the question is, why?
Yeah.
Why? What purpose? If the job is to get from point A to point B, well, if you put a third wheel on that, it'll never fall over. You don't need any intelligence to run a 3-wheeled vehicle or 4-wheeled vehicle. And I can imagine some of the developers, again, I don't know any of them, but I can imagine someone saying, but what fun is that? That's more, I want to do something that people will marvel at, the technological genius. And they say, but it just didn't do anything that anyone needed.
Exactly. It's a novel approach to a problem that's already been solved.
It's exactly,
Yeah.
A bicycle works just fine, and scooters work just fine, and little 3-wheel things. And actually we can see, if you look at the mall cops and stuff that might still go around on these sort of things, there are actually lots of 3-wheeled versions. If you ever take a notice at an airport or whatever, there might be someone on some little thing and you'll look and go, oh, look, there's a third wheel. And that's just someone who just made a much cheaper version, because it didn't have to be smart and not figure out how to not fall over.
Actually, so. I've seen wheelchair versions.
Wow.
A colleague of mine, in fact, has a wheelchair version of it, and that I think is fascinating, because especially if you are if you are disabled and unable to use your legs, I would think that this might be, a form of exercise in that sense, helping your coordination. I don't know. Again, we're speculating about an industry we know nothing about.
Yeah, I know nothing about it. But I guess back to the point of it being, though, that for me, getting into the technology was all about to solve a particular problem, and in the early days it was solving the problems that I wanted solved. There was a lot of selfish motivation.
Well, the ADAT is a great story of that. So why don't you go into that just a little bit, because that's exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah, the ADAT was a unbelievably challenging project and very rewarding project, but it's first and foremost, it's I always have to make clear that I don't there was a big team that worked on ADAT. I was one of the people, and Keith Barr, of course, co-founder of Alesis, he was the one who really drove that project and really wanted it. In fact, probably the best lesson I learned from Keith is audacity, because at that point, I mean, we started working on the ADAT in like 1988 or 89. So I'm like 27 years old, right? I'm a seasoned engineer of 27. I mean, I'd been working for 8 years or so on products and all, but when he said, we should make a digital tape recorder, I thought, I couldn't imagine. That felt like, like betting the farm on this massive investment. I mean, none of us knew tape recorders. We're all reading. There's like this 3 or 4 volume set of, of technical books on how all magnetic recording works, and learning about, bit density and encoding schemes and error correction and interleave and how a VHS tape deck works. Once we settled on VHS, new heads, new tape speed, new track pitch. There was so much new, and it really only happened because Keith said, "No, we got to do this." In terms of the meeting a need, for me, from the first minute, it's like, well, that's my dream, right? I'd like everyone else. I'd had a Porta studio. At that time, I had a Fostex 8-track, right? The R8 or R something
I had
like
one
that.
of those too. I went from a 30-40 to that. Yes.
33. So I had a 2340 was my first deck, then a Porta studio, and then the Fostex, and which was great. But the MO was
you're never going to get the sound you want.
You're never going to get the sound. And of course, I was doing I'd done sessions. So I'd done, some of the first sessions with the Sony Dash machine.
Yeah.
The 3M 32-track digital machines. So I knew what digital could do, but these were, you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. So this is unobtainium.
Yeah.
So there was just no question from the first minute that, well, if we could make an affordable 8-track digital, and I was real keen on the idea of the modularity as well, and being able to, how we make it so that you could seamlessly synchronize and make digital copies and so on. And it was just an amazing project. It was a good number of years to bring it to life, but that was definitely an instant home run. That was really gratifying.
That was meeting a need, as you say. That was really it was part of a changing industry at that point. And I think it really. I mean, I actually remember when you guys introduced it and showed it off for the first time, and jaws were dropping. Now, of course, technology was going absolutely batshit crazy at that point in the world. I mean, there were so many new innovations and new inventions and everything coming up every day. Were you guys aware of, let's say, the DA88, the other formats developing at the same time, or was everybody siloed?
My understanding is the DA88 was not in development at all at the same time. The DA88 was that later? You'd have to ask someone who was there at Tascam. But when we first showed the ADAT at January of 91.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we had it was virtually done. We had a we had a bug in one. We did 4 custom chips to make this run. We had a bug in one that caused the error correction to not work properly. So we had to defeat the error correction, which meant we could play tapes, but if there was any errors on the tapes, the random error data would just come right through and could make a big pop or whatever.
Yep.
Surprisingly, we had so few errors because the tape format itself was quite robust. It was actually designed pretty conservatively, but we decided we can't play it for anybody, because if you just hear one pop, people are going to say, "Nah, it's not real." So we showed it. It was maybe one of the early examples of what people today call vaporware, right? And there were a lot of naysayers. I do believe there were some folks at Tascam at the time basically telling people it'll never see the light of day, because there's no way that Matsushita and JVC, who owned the patents on VHS, there's no way they'll ever allow this deck to come out. And needless to say, there's all kinds of fun stories about how we resolved all that, but the thing did finally ship almost a year later. I think it was we'd almost hit the year anniversary, because there's always just a little bit more stuff to do. And I believe at that point, Tascam said, we have to respond to it. So the things, to be real, there were other things going on. Yamaha had come out with a fixed head multi-track. I think it cost about $12,000 or $15,000. Akai came out with an interesting, they'd first done an analog multi-track on a car track, and then the Atom, I think it was called the Atom system.
Right. Yeah.
And we looked at that because that was going on. But we really, we were well in development when those showed up, but what certainly gave me pause when I was thinking at the time was probably my biggest fear developing ADAT was that I was sure that Sony or Yamaha, one of these major companies, that they just had this design in their back pocket already. They just weren't delivering it because they were going to milk getting, $100,000 for tape recorders as long as they could. So I just imagined, I was thrilled to work on it, but in my mind, I was sure we were just going to get slaughtered. And it was another good learning moment, because, now after the fact, having, read a bunch of books on it and everything, this classic innovator's dilemma problem for these entrenched incumbents who are typically reluctant to obsolete themselves, which is really what's required if you want to continue on an innovation curve. So we had nothing to lose. We weren't a tape recorder company. We could design it any way we wanted. We weren't going to cannibalize any of our sales. We were just going to show up one day and have a digital tape recorder. And I think there's no question those other companies had the technical wherewithal to have designed their own ADAT, but they didn't have the vision due to where they were in the marketplace. So we were very happy to see that no one else had done it. Tascam did a great job in responding. I'm a little biased about the benefits and differences between them. I think their approach meant that the tape, the data format was a little more fragile because it was much smaller track pitch, and it's on 8mm tape. But they were smart. Their experience. We definitely designed a machine for the musician.
Yeah, they aimed right away for a different market sector.
They aimed a different market, and it was a big need. When we first shipped to ADAT, the post-production world was just jumping all over us, like, please make this for us. And we were honest. If you look at the first remote we did, the BRC, the big remote control.
I remember that.
It had stuff like, you could set you could have your tape counter running in bars and beats, and it could spit out MIDI clock, and you could, if you'd use that, you could say, you want to fly in vocals. You could actually have, I want machine 2 to be on chorus 2 while machine 1's on chorus 1.
Right,
so I can fly those vocals over. It was completely music centric, because that's what we knew. That's what basically put in every feature I'd ever wanted in a recorder for a musician. I didn't know the post-production world, so SMPTE was an afterthought, and a Sony 9-pin, and we did eventually add those capabilities in other interfaces, and in fact made the ultimate, you could say, post-production ADAT with the last model, the M20, which had a real robust transport on every feature you could want for that world. But it was too little, too late.
I mean, you guys threw the grenade, and then the market exploded.
Yeah.
So
It did, but it's also a good lesson in brand permission. So Alesis had made a name for itself as the company that really was bringing great value for musicians. A lot of innovation, but the first affordable digital reverbs, first affordable drum machines, sequencers, breakthrough keyboards, and then tape recorders. It was not a brand that was viewed as a pro brand. It was not a brand used by professionals in studios. Now, it's not to say there weren't lots of great records made with ADATs, a ton of them. Sure. And there were a lot of studios, music-oriented studios is using ADAT. But in the film and broadcast world, I think even if we'd made the best product for that market, we would have had to earn our stake, because they have different expectations of the company and a brand and so on. And so Tascam, Sony, some of these other brands had they already had brand permission.
Yes,
to be in that world.
That's a really good point, because you're right. Alesis was pigeonholed in the same category that, for example, Mackie was. It was a
they went hand in hand. You're absolutely right.
In fact, I remember who was it? I think it was Fletcher. One NAMM show came, stuck an ADAT and a Mackie mixer on a steak, and we won't.
You remember what he called it?
Yes, I do. Shit on a stick, as I recall.
That's what he called it.
Quite amazing. But I mean, really, truly, you guys did. And I don't even, as you say, you were laboring in a vacuum. You had no idea if anybody else might be looking over your shoulder or catching up to you in that sense. But man, I think it must have been just an absolute shock, even with expectations, that you moved the needle as much as you did.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. And it was a back order situation for probably a year or so, and just trying to build as many decks as we could. I mean, Alesis built hundreds of thousands of tape recorders.
Oh, no doubt.
It's unbelievable, right? It very quickly became probably it may still be, it's probably the best selling multi-track recorder that was ever made. Mm-hmm. I suppose if you don't count very inexpensive 4-track cassette Porta Studios,
probably.
But it was very reaffirming. I mean, we couldn't imagine. It's rare that this happens. I don't think there's been another time in my career where a product felt like such a sure thing, right? I mean, even the success of Pod, we really didn't know Pod was going to be as big as it was.
Sure.
We did. But ADAT, we were all going, if we can do this, if we can actually pull this off, it was going to be just a giant paradigm shift. Yeah. And that's how it turned out.
Yeah. Now I want to not necessarily back up, but point out here that you were not really part of Alesis. You guys had formed your own company, because I remember Fast Forward Designs, which was your thing. And you guys were sort of techie guns for hire for a number of companies, and I've in fact, I think I sent you a picture once. I ran into some other obscure product of yours once in a thrift store. You guys were making all sorts of weird stuff.
We did make a lot of weird stuff. I think it goes back to that notion of figuring out what it is you're good at and that you enjoy. I'd been at Oberheim almost 5 years, and that was an incredible experience. But I felt it was getting to a point where it felt a little limiting in terms of the range of products that we could do there. Uh-huh. And also, as we learned quickly in hindsight, it seemed like there was the possibility that they were entering some financial trouble. And so I was making a good living as well on the side, doing sessions and still doing gigs. So, and didn't have kids yet, so it wasn't a big financial risk. Just tell Tom, thanks so much, it's been a great experience, but I think it's time for me to move on. 5 weeks later, they filed for bankruptcy.
Ooh.
And so no correlation between that. I certainly didn't know it. I just turned 24. I didn't know at the time it was that dire. And another engineer
That was endemic for a lot of synthesizer companies at that point in time too. I mean, Moog Music was going through stuff, ARP was going through it. I mean, it was very
ARP and Moog, and and a few years later, Dave Smith went through it.
Yep.
Roger Lynn went through it. It was tough. No one had the handbook of how to be a brilliant inventor, entrepreneur, and also run a successful business. So
exactly right.
So that actually ended up being a big inspiration for starting Fast Forward Designs, because we realized that the common thread for all those problems were it was the management of the business. It was so easy to be, in an instant, have too much inventory, be undercapitalized, and be extended to the bank. And, a bank can just foreclose on your company if that's the situation you're in. So it occurred to us that, well, why not be able to design products, do the stuff we love to do, and not have any of that financial risk? So a week after I quit, Michel Douadic quit Oberheim, and we'd worked together for most of those 5 years. And I saw us as kind of like a great songwriting team. We really kind of complemented each other in terms of our technical skills, and really loved working together. And so said, well, we should start a little consulting company. And my wife was the third partner who handled all of the non-technical side, found us an office and set up the business. And we started in May of '85 and immediately had our first client, which was Dynacord in Germany. They wanted to make some advanced digital drums, and we made one of the earlier digital drum sets called the AD1. That was the very first Fast Forward Designs product. And the business model was very simple. We got paid for developing product. We'd get a royalty on all the products we developed, with our main our explanation to our clients with that is, you want us to be motivated to have this be as successful as possible, right? If a royalty is where we're going to make our profit, then, well, if our royalty check is real big, then you're selling a whole lot of gear. So that's a good thing, right?
We're invested. Yeah.
Yes. So we wanted to be partners, and, it's kind of a long story, but getting back to not having been an employee at all of Alesis, Fast Forward Designs, though, ended up becoming a real integral part of what Alesis was, because we felt real ownership, because we were getting royalties on all the products that we were developing for Alesis. And we ended up developing 40 products for Alesis. We did several for Dynacord. Then they decided they were no longer going to do MI products. They were going to focus on their PA world. We did some MIDI lighting systems for CAE Leprechaun. We did different flavors of ADAT later on for Panasonic, Studer, and Fostex.
Right. I forgot about those. Yeah.
Yeah, we did work for DigiDesign. We did all the sample cell products, those sound cards. Were
they already DigiDesign at that point? Because I know they started out as drum ROMs.
They changed pretty quickly from DigiDrums to DigiDesign. Yeah, so that's where we first met Peter Gocher and Evan Brooks, as they were doing replacement drum chips I was still at Oberheim for the Oberheim DMX, and of course also Lynn and Emu drum machines. So yeah, that was their start, and it evolved from there.
Man,
but so we did a lot of products for a lot of companies. That was our main focus. We grew. I think we were probably 11 people at the peak of just the pure Fast Forward Designs, mainly, engineers. A lot of talented engineers joined us to develop products for all these companies.
Okay.
And then we decided it was time to do our own products. So
okay, so that does beg the question. Here you have you have made this realization that creating intellectual property has a much lower overhead than holding inventory.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you
And then we go and want an inventory.
Exactly.
What's up with that?
What's up with that? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think two things. First of all, 10 years of developing products for other companies, that was another invaluable education phase, right? We were really on the inside of many companies. We could assess what about them we liked, what we didn't like, and kind of formulate what kind of company we'd like to be. And then you triangulate that with a few other things that were important. One, quite frankly, was we'd had a really smooth path with Alesis for a number of years, but we told them from the beginning that ADAT was going to have a very finite life. I estimated it was 10 years max, simply because the main benefit of ADAT was you could, in 1991, you could buy 2 gigabytes of storage for $10. It was called an SVHS tape. Right. And nothing could touch that. Pro Tools was born the same year as ADAT. It was in its infancy, but the price of a hard disk, and then having no good way without spending a lot of money to even back up what you recorded, plus how unreliable computers and software was back then. I mean, you really were on the bleeding edge if you were recording on a computer in the early 90s.
Oh, sure.
If you're recording audio. Whereas on ADAT, it's like another $10. I just bought another 2 gigabytes and I can back up my whole session. It was so affordable, but there was no question that it was just a matter of time.
Moore's Law.
Yeah, Moore's Law. You did the math. It's like 10 years and tape will be dead.
Yes.
And there's too many advantages of hard disk recording. So we mapped out what we believe to be the future of the home recording studio, and how ADAT could lead the way of the transition from tape to hard disk in ways that are different than how they exist today, but that'd be a whole nother long story. But we thought made a lot of sense, and how ADAT could take their dominance in tape, Alesis could take the dominance in tape and transfer it over to the hard disk world. And they were very polite and nice about it. But for the first time with every product we proposed, they were like, no, we don't think we want to do that. And so that created some additional motivation, because now we're thinking, well, we were getting very, very nice royalty checks from Alesis. And this is now became a question of, for this to be a sustainable business, do we want to be dependent on other companies' decisions of what they want to do or not do? And that maybe we've learned enough that we don't have to make the same mistakes others made, that we could make our own products. And of course, just deciding you want to make products doesn't make a lot of sense, again, unless you have an idea that you think really solves a problem, really meets a need for musicians. And that just happened to be at the same time that I was really noticing and feeling like guitar players were being left behind from a technology standpoint.
Now, that was the other thing that I thought was very, very interesting, was that you, who even back then I knew as a synthesizer guy, honed in on guitar.
Yeah, I think there is a common bond for musicians in general, and having played in lots of bands and done lots of sessions, I clearly worked with guitar players for my whole musical life, and understood. And it's maybe a little stereotypical, but it wasn't uncommon that it was the keyboard player often solving the technical problems for the guitar player in the band days, right? Especially when they started getting into racks and stuff. It's like, well, so how do I make this MIDI foot switch change my rack processor? And it's, again, at that point, you think about the mid 90s, a keyboard player could push any button and get pretty much any sound they wanted. And plugins were starting to really happen. And so producers and everyone, it's like it's so much at your disposal. And guitar players were still spending all day to get one sound in a session, and then dealing with the hums and buzzes and problems.
Bringing 20 pedals together and all of this Neanderthal stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, it was certainly just purely a logical viewpoint, without much awareness of all of the emotional connections there are for guitar players with all this gear. But
Sure.
as that naivete was probably a good thing, because otherwise we might not have ever tried. But it just started out very simply. It's like, wouldn't it be great if you could, push a button on a foot switch for a guitar amp and be able to get any amp, any effect, and get that wide range of sound. So it started out as a research project, that because we didn't want to make the investment into custom chips. All of the Alesis processing we've done so far were always custom chips. You
Right.
couldn't buy DSP chips, weren't affordable enough to put into mainstream products. But I discovered an affordable DSP that TI Japan had built for home audio, because surround sound was just in its infancy, and they needed some DSP horsepower for that world. And I thought maybe this part could do the job for us. So we started investigating that part and starting some algorithms, and then before you knew it, we had something we thought was worth bringing to the world, and started building products.
Now, I think, for example, the pod, that made sense, especially based on your history. You already had a lot of DSP experience, as you say. That was essentially a logical progression. When you started getting into actually making guitars, that gave me a little bit of pause, because as I say, that's a completely different world and a completely different mentality in that sense.
Totally true. I think, it was still looking at solving what I still feel are very real functional problems. And it's just clearly we're not guitar builders. So again, there's a brand permission thing and an understanding thing. We worked with guitar builders. We later models worked with guys like James Tyler, who was an amazing guitar builder, to make sure that we're making instruments that are really great. But there's just a finite number of people out there who want the benefits, that are willing to embrace a new technology in that level, right? But it's being able to, it's just a natural extension from my perspective of, if you want to be able to have any effects and any amps and any cabs and any mics on those cabs at your disposal, why not also be able to have any instrument and any tuning at your disposal, which naturally belonged in the instrument. We looked at doing it like the Roland approach. You put a pickup on a guitar and everything,
Generating,
but
basically.
I felt you could only really get the level of performance we wanted if you can control the entire path, right? If you've built the guitar and calibrated it and know exactly the signal levels on the strings and the DSP and everything, that's when you can make it sound exactly as you want it to sound. So that was the philosophy there.
So, okay, so you just had to become complete control freaks to make it work, basically.
Yeah, I used to say, I don't know if it was very poetic, but I like to think that the goal was to give the guitarist complete control of everything between their fingertips to their ears. That, tone starts here.
Yep.
We never pretended. It's like, you're sorry, if you got your favorite guitar player, you can have their exact gear. You're not going to sound like them if you don't have this, right? So you're responsible for what your fingers do. And in fact, it was critical to try to help people understand the guitars we made were not guitar synthesizers. You were hearing your actual strings. And if you put new brighter strings on the guitar, the models all will sound brighter, because the strings are the signal source. So there's nothing lost in translation from what you play. But if you wanted it to sound, you wanted the sound of, a particular humbucker in a particular position, or a particular body resonance, or even particular tone knob controls, all of that could be configured and tuning the way you wanted. And of course, configure that to any effect and any amp that you want.
Yeah, and I think if you're talking about guitar players, there are a few musicians who are more sensitive to tone.
Yeah.
Because keyboard players, their understanding is that it's a synthesizer, and you can voice them differently. But guitar players, they're really, as you say, that a lot of it comes from your tone.
Well, I have a theory about that. I think, and that's why I actually have a ton of respect for guitar players, and actually I'm quite jealous. I think a lot of keyboard players are just frustrated wannabe guitar players. I think fundamentally, I mean, the guitar is the perfect blend of expressivity and polyphony, right? I mean, you can be extremely expressive on a violin or things like that, but you're essentially a monophonic, you can play two notes at once if you want, but you're a monophonic instrument. Guitar having 6 voices, but everything you do with your left and right hand affects how it sounds. I mean, there's so much there. Whereas, as keyboard players, we got the benefit of polyphony, but if you play piano, you get to decide what note you're going to play when and how loud. And then you can't do anything except stop that note. It's just, it's over. It's just, and that string's just going to die away. And now when you add the expressivity that came from, the birth of rock and roll, right? A guitar was just going to die away as well. But once you had high gain amplifiers and feedback and things like that, you could make a guitar sustain forever. You could, there was just so much expressivity. So I think as a result, if as a musician, you're drawn to guitar, I think you spend much more of your time being right-brained and staying in the creative space of your musicality, because everything you're doing at all times is affecting how you make music. And I think keyboard players are, I think sometimes to advantage, sometimes disadvantage, are more of a mix of left and right brain. They're thinking more intellectually about the process. There's certainly exceptions. These are big generalizations, but as a result, I found a guitar player was a fantastic customer to design products for, because they are not going to cut you any slack at all. They're not going to be impressed by your technology or what you accomplished. It has to do something actually useful for them in a musical sense. So that purity, I found, it was a wonderful challenge and was key. I'm still really quite proud of one of the last things that I was deeply involved with Line 6, which was our Helix platform, where we really set out as a company, a real company initiative to say, we want to truly make the ultimate guitar processor. And this is one where, there's just no question, right? And it was a fantastic experience, and it still is a hugely successful family today, 7 years after its launch. I think that was, as a designer, that taught me a lot, doing products for guitar players. And also, there can be an advantage sometimes. Sorry for rambling on about this,
please.
But I said early in my career, my motivation was very much selfish. These were the products I want as a keyboard player, as a recording engineer. This is what I want, and hopefully it's things other people want too, right? Well, I don't play guitar. I can play really badly, like most keyboard players. But I'm not a guitarist, and so you find that you have to learn some real skills in listening to your customer, listening to this other musician. We can speak the same language of music, but to be able to really understand what's going on and what they're dealing with. It's a great learning experience, because when you want to really solve a problem, it's learning to speak the language of with someone to actually understand what the root of the problem is, because most people will talk to you in circles with really their idea of a solution. They'll say, I want a pedal that'll do this, right? And then you realize, no, what I really need to know is, what are you trying to do? Because maybe the answer isn't going to be a pedal at all.
But it's such a subjective thing. And that, I think you made a really good point when you talk about the difference in terms of guitar being such a right-brained instrument. And the interaction between left and right brain and also left and right hands is so different. All in all, you're creating tools for artists. You're creating tools that are going to create art. Now, coming to that from the perspective of, as you say, building instruments, building tools that you wanted, that's a completely different perspective than coming and saying, okay, I want to build a tool for something that I don't have that firsthand lens to look through.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of
but it's at its core, it's just basic empathy, right? I mean, if you've lived through, gosh, I wish I could do this creatively, musically, and you happen to be a keyboard player, why is that feeling that different than for a guitar player? I think the learning was more about, again, this slightly different approach. As a keyboard player early on, I could not understand the fascination with stomp boxes, for example.
Yeah.
It just seemed like a nightmare to me. It's like, why would you want to have all of these disparate pedals, not have any idea about levels, have all these cables and interconnects and all the problems you could have, power supplies or batteries, even worse, right? All this, I couldn't understand. Just the complexity of it all versus being able to just, connect things together in a more, more sensible way, a keyboard player's way. Yeah. Right. So it made sense that the early products were all about, okay, it can do everything, it's fully programmable. Great. Well, the problem is any programmable effect is demanding you to think very left brain and actually plan in advance what it is that you want. And what I was completely blind to in the early days is how it completely changes performance when you're able to have this pedal board with a bunch of discrete individual elements that just do a few very basic things, because you can operate in a very right brain way in that world. I mean, it becomes part of an extension of your instrument.
Right.
The notion that you could just be soloing and subconsciously it's just, you just want a little something more, and you just go right for that other little overdrive pedal you've got, or you've throw in an EQ or add some chorus. It's just all there at your disposal to be an extension of your performance. Right. And, I started realizing, well, keyboard players have some of that, right? And why is it we like that the filter knob is right there instead of having to go down through 5 pages to get to a parameter, right? You might just want to go grab that filter knob. So, just being able to make those connections and realize what that's about, and then try to solve the seemingly impossible problem. Can you have the best of both worlds? So something like a Helix, I'm not sure how many people use it in this way, but I think for a lot of guitar players, they'd be smart to just forget about the fact that the Helix has tons of presets and that you can make lots of different presets. You can actually set it up so that you only use one preset, but that preset is set up so versatilely, and that all the buttons have displays on them, so that you literally can think of it like each preset is constructed like when I'm actually constructing a pedal board. Because that is the time, by the way, that the guitar player has to go left brain. They're going to plan out their pedal board. It's like, it's time to decide, do I want the wah before the distortion or after the distortion? Do I want, which pedals? I've only got this much space. Which pedals are really important to me on this, right? You go completely left brain and you have to plan it all out. And then once you're done, you're done. So if you approach pre-programming a Helix that way and just make one preset, and it's like, I've got a whole bunch of pedals on this board. I can turn them each on and off how I like. There's this notion called snapshots, where basically it's without changing your pedal board, it's just changing where the knobs are, if you want. So you can start from there. And we actually even made it so every single knob on the pedal board you could adjust with your feet from the pedal board. So I don't know. Sounds like I'm turning this into a Helix commercial, but I guess the lesson of it all is that's the fun and the challenge of the creativity of being a product designer. Try to really understand the customer's needs. Try to find that impossible solution. I mean, people want a product that can do anything they could dream up of, but should be just completely simple to use, and I don't even have to think about it, and I should never have to read a manual,
Oh,
that
yeah.
sort of thing. That's the impossible challenge for products, but it's a fun challenge.
It is. It is. So let's fast forward to,
Yeah.
no pun intended, to present day. I recently saw that you're now doing some stuff with Tom Oberheim again.
Yeah, that's been
It's
great.
great seeing you guys
So
at
lucky.
Flex. What's in the future there? Are you planning on doing the NAMM show together or anything? Or
Oh, I don't know. I don't think that too far in the future, but I can tell you just what led to that. It was just really kind of a wonderful story. In the back of my mind, I mentioned Oberheim had to file bankruptcy in '85.
Mhm.
Tom Oberheim lost the rights to the Oberheim brand and logo in 1985. It went to another small firm. Then in '89 or so, it went to Gibson, who had it for a long time. And Gibson did some Oberheim products for a while, and then they still had the brand, but they would let it kind of lapse in some countries. And Behringer started registering the Oberheim name, and it was just nagging at me forever that something just didn't feel right in the world, that Tom Oberheim didn't own his own name. And he started making synths again in, I think, 2009, but he wouldn't put the Oberheim brand. He was, he knew he didn't own his name. He'd sign his name. It'd say Tom Oberheim, right? Because that's just his name. So it was about a 10-year process with starts and stops. That just was this little side project of mine that somehow Tom should get his name back. And that's a whole nother long story. But in the last summer, summer of 2021, we got the last of his trademarks and logos worldwide all back to Tom.
Oh, that's
and that, which was great. And then Tom
paying back for you too, wasn't it? Helping him.
Oh yeah, I mean, I owe so much to Tom and that experience, and it's kind of my first. I still have it's off camera over here, crazy collection of Oberheim gear and a great love for the Oberheim stuff, and that's, and so we got the trademark back, and then on top of that, my wife and I had been doing some work with Dave Smith at Sequential, and David turned 70 and was thinking about what's the next chapter for the company. He still loved designing synths. He wasn't particularly fond of running a company. So we helped set up the partnership between Sequential and Focusrite, which has worked out fabulously well. And in those discussions, of course, Dave and Tom had worked together on the OB6 6 years ago or so. And Dave and the Sequential team did an amazing job bringing back the Prophet 5 Rev 4. And that just naturally turned into discussions like, well, what about really doing an Oberheim right? And so it wouldn't have been possible without Dave Smith and the Sequential team, because Tom's 86, and that's a little old to be starting a new company. And I'm not quite that old, but I really didn't want to start a new company. But we were both thrilled to be working with the Sequential team to bring this to life, because they had the infrastructure and the factory relationship to build synths and to sell them and so on. So that started a pretty fun process to really bring a true Oberheim back into the world. The OBX8 started shipping, I think, end of July of this year, and it's been a pretty huge success.
Oh, you've been
Obviously,
a papa for that one. I could see you glowing on that one.
Yeah, no, it's really a labor of love, because it was the chance to revisit all the designs we did in the '80s, and not even do something that's just a simulation, right? It's like it's the same actual analog circuitry as those originals, but with modern production techniques and reliability. And so that was amazing. I think goes without saying, it's there's such a sad element to it, because the part that none of us at all expected was Dave's very untimely death, and that's still a shock for all of us. He was such such an icon, and I feel privileged. I first met him in 1978 when he launched the Prophet 5 at the
Wow.
Disneyland Hotel, January NAMM.
Uh-huh.
And we worked together. We had, in the discussions of what became MIDI in the early 80s, and we were competitors but friends. And despite knowing all these decades, the OBX8 was the first time I actually got a chance to collaborate on designing a product with Dave, and that was a real treat for me, and to work with the whole Sequential team. And Dave was really, really proud of the synth. I think we went to Berlin together in May to launch it, and you can see in the videos there he knew we'd made something really special and was true to the Oberheim name. So I'm thrilled he was able to leave that gift for all of us, but he certainly left us all way too soon.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So you want to pontificate or
what have I been doing?
well, what would you like to pontificate specifically on what do you think is coming? I mean, technology is now in certain way. I mean, of course, it's always developing very, very quickly, but I think we've plateaued on a lot of stuff.
I'm not sure I'd agree. I don't think our plateaus are any different than they've been for many, many decades or more. I think it's wherever we're at, whatever present day is, we of course have a reason to marvel at all the technological innovations we get to use. And it's pretty easy to imagine it's like everything's kind of been done, I think I'll mangle the quote, so I won't even try, but wasn't there like beginning of the 20th century, someone at the patent office kind of saying everything that's needs to be invented has been invented? It's kind of like it was done. There's some famous quote. 20 years from now, it's I think it'll be just as dramatic as the past 20 years.
Well, let me maybe rephrase when I say plateau. I don't necessarily mean in terms of technology, because that's always going to march on. But we have, at least as creatives, reached a certain point where there's almost nothing we can't do. And
that's a very good point.
For choice, unlimited tracks, unlimited sounds. And so in that sense, I wonder, it's gotten so easy for anybody to just, grab GarageBand or some other, music has become so almost commodified in that sense. And so
the tools have, and I think it's a fantastic thing. I mean, one of the things that's so great about the tools being commoditized and the distribution and visibility being commoditized, right? I mean, you literally can make music for free. I mean, you have to have some sort of device, but let's just say all you've got's a phone. You can make music for free, and you can post it for free, and you can get discovered. It's a crapshoot like anything. But I think what's nice about it is that that democratization enables us to discover talents we maybe never would have before. So that aspect to me is really positive. I mean, just having the tools doesn't make you a great artist. It's like, I have Photoshop. It's still not going to mean I can make some beautiful art, because that's not my skill set. But, in the right hands, Photoshop or any number of artistic tools, it's mind-boggling what people are able to do, right? So that aspect I see as very positive. It's, it does mean we have to learn differently, I think, how to appreciate and discover music. It used to be that there were a handful of people that were really curating it all for us, right? Who did the record companies deem worthy?
Exactly.
Who was paying the radio stations the most?
Yeah.
And then we'd get spoon-fed. It's like, okay, here's the latest hit. I'm sure there's current versions of that sort of stuff, all still plenty going on, but the reality is,
discover. Yeah, it's a lot harder to discover content now.
Yes, it
But
is.
as a person creating tools, or let's say as a
Okay.
person who has had a vision for creating tools,
Yeah.
what do you think is left to create as far as creative tools?
Um, I guess all I can say is I'm sure there's plenty more.
I'm
Only
sure
because
it's
I've
too.
never
You know.
uh the feeling I have now is no different than the feeling I had 40 years ago, which
Mhm.
is, I mean, the tools I had 40 years ago were awesome, but then you could always just find, gosh, I wish could do this, or if
Yeah,
it worked in that way.
yeah,
There's just, I think the new inventions, point out those new things. Um, I mean, look, remember when we used to be thrilled to be able to, when you were able to buy your first, 10 megabyte hard drive, and
yeah.
and now
It was the size of a
it's like,
shoebox. Yeah.
right, and now we need virtually unlimited storage because everything is so huge. I mean, the it just kind of all feeds on itself. I mean, and we'll have more and more um needs that will come up. I don't think that's a very satisfying answer, but I guess my instinct is there's still no shortage of ideas and ways we can explore
Oh, I mean,
more
there's something new
safely.
every day, no question. And I know we're all blown away every day, but oh, now there's AI for this, and um, but it's
AI is going to take things in a way we can't even imagine.
scary.
Some good and some very scary. Yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah, it's true.
no
True.
question about it.
Mhm. But I guess you're enjoying watching from the sidelines at this point, most of it, huh?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm feel real fortunate that I'm now able to just help out some people I've really enjoy in the industry. I'm dabbling in a number of things. The Oberheim thing's one. I've been working with DW for a number of years on a new digital drum technology that we previewed at their 50th anniversary event. That's really exciting.
Cool.
Um, and so I imagine I'll continue to keep busy and try to do some fun things. But maybe here's maybe a optimistic view of the future I'd like to think about, which is I'm hopeful that as AI and technology continue to advance, there's going to be a growing thirst for live performance, because there's something about seeing human beings interact and express themselves in the
Yes.
same way that, in the end, I mean, we've got, TV channels, in the millions, it seems, and, streaming services, and we've got movies, but there's something different and special about going to a theater and seeing actors on a stage perform live. And that's I think there's just an intrinsic human need for that, which is really great. So I think it'll be fabulous to see the technology continue to enable us to do impossible things in the studio and in composition. But I hope there'll be a growing hunger for that interactive experience that can really only happen with human beings, and just spontaneous creativity. So,
Yeah. Very good point. Okay, so one last wrap-up question for you, if you will.
mhm,
Having been through the decades that you've been through, and
mhm.
now looking at what's going on now, what would you tell a 15-year-old you coming into the industry now?
I'd say, boy, I wish I was you. I mean, I'm one of those who just really loves the evolution of technology, and it's mind-boggling to imagine what they'll get the chance to discover. But on a real practical standpoint, when I think about what are the key things to success, assuming that's what that 15-year-old might want.
However we define it. Yeah.
Yeah, I I do firmly believe you don't have to be the smartest, the brightest, the the richest, the best educated. Um, what what you have to have is tenacity. What you have to have is a drive, and this unwavering push to just want to go and do. And that's probably the single biggest piece of advice I give any young people I speak to. Some are spending so much time to figure out what it is they should do, right? What's the career I should choose, whatever. And I just tell them the single most important thing you can do is just do. Pick anything. I don't care what it is. Start doing it. Start developing some skills in whatever you choose to do. And if you're not liking it, choose something else and go do it. Don't spend a lot of time just thinking about it or educating yourself about it. You're right. Imagine if someone said they wanted to be a musician and you said, you should like go to school for 12 years, but don't actually play any music. Just go to school, study all the masters, learn music theory, learn everything about it. You say you want to be a musician, play music every day, a whole lot, listen to lots of music, just keep doing, make mistakes and be comfortable with being bad at something for a while. That's how you learn. I went and doing this OBX8, I joke about it. I went back and looked. I have the original source code we wrote for the OB8 in 1983. I had to go back and look at it to make sure we're accurately doing the features in the same way because we wanted to be patch compatible. I found 3 bugs in the OB8 code. It's like, oh, that was dumb. I mean, one of them was just a straight out typo. And, it's like, well, that's what some young 20-year-olds did when they were making the product. You make mistakes, but just go and do stuff. You're not going to be the best at what you want to do from day one. So do. Yeah. That's
you're also not going to end up where you think where you're targeting. It's never.
That's a good point too. Yeah. It is the journey. I mean, again, that 15-year-old was still going to be a rock star. He was going to be the next Keith Emerson, and knowing the products, that was cool. But yeah, that was the path I thought I was on. And then, it can be really freeing to just not even care so much about the path you're on. Just make sure you're on a path. And anytime you want a fork in the road on that path, you get to make it. Just be in charge of what you want to do next, and makes it simple.
Sounds really simple. Good advice, though. Yeah.
I hope so.
Marcus Ryle, thank you for being my guest.
My pleasure. Hope there was something of value there.
Oh, I think so. Cool. Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.